I have been asked to speak only for 10 minutes. The two most important, the nature of the society. So one has to relate philosophy, ideology and society. Also at the same time one has to see the reality. The reality or truth in terms of knowledge and practice. The realization. How social justice is realized. How human rights are really restored if they have been distorted, if they have been denied to the members of a society. And I think in this, we have already fundamental rights in the Constitution, but why should we have the human rights? Where is the need? And I think it started with the idea of civil society given by Karl Marx. Marx was one who talked of human rights through his concept of civil society. He was one who talked of, defined elaborately alienation, human beings being treated as commodity. Why should this happen? And there is nothing new about human rights. And Marx wrote about, I think 160 years ago about civil society and human rights. I think, therefore, justice is the first function of human rights, and justice can be ensured and granted to members of a society by creation of institutions. Now, institutions would mean that human rights cannot be an arbitrary phenomenon. We have to ensure through institutions, and institutions are related to what we call freedom, what we call the sacrifice, and liberty, equality. All these institutions related to these basic principles of justice have to be seen very carefully. Justice is natural, but sometimes justice also denies somebody's share in the society, and one feels that it's being given to somebody else. Now this has to be checked and seen properly. Sometimes we tolerate injustice in society because we want to escape from, or we want to see that no bigger injustice is done, and therefore injustice continues to some kind of a tolerable limit. And therefore I think if there has to be justice, then there cannot be compromise. And primacy of justice would mean distributive shares in society. So social justice provides a way of assigning rights and duties in the basic institutions of society, and this is how justice is basic to all sorts of human rights, whether they are in the Constitution or by creation of Human Rights Commission at the national level, or also at the state level, that now states have the Human Rights Commissions. Now, maybe that this looks like an ideal situation, but there is no way except to understand that very clearly the human rights, the concept of human rights as related to social justice. And social justice, therefore, ultimately means that one has to see the society beyond one's own self-interest. Now, sense of justice means realization of others' existence. And unless this happens in the society, I think justice cannot take place, justice cannot be an integral part of any human society. I think justice, and here I would like note about the history as such, that how in 1948 UNO accepted, and slowly it has become more or less a formal reality in a formal sense. But development as freedom, this is something very important which has been given by Amartya Sen, and this means that social opportunity. And for social opportunity, one has to think of that capacity or capability among the human beings to have access to social opportunities. Now, Sen also talks about that there are impediments, social impediments with regard to social opportunities. And the impediments would be caste, or what Professor Modi mentioned, caste, panchayat, honor killings, maybe gender, maybe ignorance, maybe illiteracy, maybe other exploitation, maybe alienation within the family, outside the family, in the society, and therefore these are the impediments which one has to think very carefully. Now we have several questions about this kind of idea, because Sen himself talks of impediments, but scholars like Mark Gallanter and many others have talked about how can we pursue equality in the lane of hierarchy. I think as sociologists, as social scientists, we have to think about this question, which Gallanter raised about 25-30 years ago in an article. And this is the problem which we have to say. Or a scholar like Meena of Institute of Economic Growth, a couple of years ago she brought out a book, A Field of One's Own. And what she says is very interesting. It's a comparative study of 4 states, that how gender is a most important impediment with regard to justice. That ownership is given to a woman on land, but no control over the land. No control over the land because of patriarchy. Patriarchy, whether it's a husband or a husband's father or son, if she is a widow, then son says he would look after. If she's not, even she's married and has the husband, then the husband would say, you don't bother about, I'm here. So this is something which is very important. Or the people are marginalized in the society. So we have to see 3 most important factors with regard to human rights and social justice. Caste is certainly one, but caste has acquired a very different form and practice today. It's not the caste which was at the time of independence. It has taken varied forms. All sorts of resiliences have occurred with regard to caste. So more than caste, I think the gender has become a factor, and then marginality. And this marginalization results into injustice in the society, and therefore I think human rights have to be seen very carefully, that how the market capital does not result into alienation. I think this debate is going on, has been there for some time with regard to FDI in the country, that how FDI would marginalize the 90% of the indigenous retailers in the country, and this would be injustice to such a large component, large section of the society. So one has to think of how the power structure of the society is transformed into social, cultural and economic domination, and results into some kind of injustice and denial of human rights to a large section of the society. And without taking much time, I would simply say that one has to think very carefully about this very concept, and whether this and there have been several practices. The various political parties like PSP, Socialist Party, and maybe Anand's new political party, which he is on the Executive Council of Aam Aadmi Party, would understand the very nature of the society, not from Delhi. He is a grassroots person, but still I would say that they should really understand these impediments and reach to the Aam Aadmi, the common man of this country, how these experiments have failed. Mayawati and Mulayam Singh, Yadav and others have talked about this. But I think we need to think of, are we really aware about? You know, I am reminded, just I'll take one more minute, I am reminded of a study of the people who were associated with the heavy Brahmins in South India. And when the Brahmin, after independence, decided to discard cultivation and migrate to the cities, then those who were working with them, they were unemployed suddenly. And this bonding with the family for generations of the landlord family, the generation gave them some kind of security and guarantee. And the decision to dispose of the land and to migrate and settle down the cities created a lot of problems. So one has to really think that are the people aware about human rights? What is their understanding? I mean, culture of poverty is a very good example, that people suffer in poverty and they think that it is the way of life. There's no way. I think there is need to have the awakening about human rights, human existence among the people. And this is something which we have to think when we construct or reconstruct this concept. So human rights would mean, therefore, by concluding that how human rights are distinct, different from fundamental rights, how human rights are related to the very basic idea of justice. And I think for this we have to understand what are the steps being taken in the country, what is the nature of the education, what is the feminist perspective, what is the role of media, whether people have the religious freedom, whether, and in fact if one understands carefully Foucault, then Foucault was one who said that the whole power, the idea of power has emanated from the struggle between the victors and losers in medieval France, medieval Europe. And from that developed the entire understanding of the society, the idea of the prison, the idea of the asylum, the idea of alienation, and this is how an idea of medicine is levels and layers and dynamics, and probably that should be the ground for us to reconceptualize the very notion of human rights. And